Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the High Dragon's Breath Bow Wow, coming back to you with another episode of Archon's Adversaries. Talking about Necrons. Let's get right into it. Army operations. The targets for the Necrons is they have appeared above your planet and they are trying to awaken a tomb. Specific for this scenario, the Necrons are here to show up and awaken part of their dynasty. A pretty standard things for Necrons. When they're not showing up on your planet by accident or coming out from underneath the ground, they're usually here to awaken fellow Necrons that are already on your world. In this case, we didn't necessarily know ahead of time that there were Necrons on this planet, but we had some inkling from the metal skeletons that would wander around every couple of decades. Their objectives: awaken the tomb. Whatever vault, whatever tomb structures, whatever constructs are underneath the ground on our planet, the Necrons want them. They want access to them. They want to get down there, wake them up, and add them to the power of their dynasty. The stages for the Necrons are pretty simple. It begins with a sudden surprise orbital attack from their Dolmen Gate teleportation system, where they jump out of nowhere, destroy everything in orbit, and pretty much start an abnormal assault. Abnormal assault is related to the vectors of their actual invasion. The Necrons are not necessarily here just to kill everyone or just to take over the planet in a logical way. They don't really give a damn about that. The only thing that they care about is the underground, the area that belongs to their tomb and the other Necrons involved in that deep underground area, which means that they might be attacking totally random vectors or totally abnormal vectors. You might not know. You might be like, well, of course we need to protect the Hive or these cities, but the Necrons are just going out into the middle of nowhere, into the equivalent of Alaska, and then just going there for no reason and killing everyone who ends up being in that area. Well, the answer is that the easiest way to get into the tomb is via that area. And then the last part is the cave fighting. The cave fighting is what happens when we show up to that area. There are already Necrons inside trying to wake up the tomb, and we assault them within their cave network. Now, eventually, if this is a place where we already know, in this case we already know a little bit about what the Necrons are trying to do and where they're going to be operating, so we can get into those cave networks via other means, but worst case scenario, we can get in the same way the Necrons did. For size. In this case, the sizes are Dynasty, Necron Army or Expedition, and then the quote-unquote Defense Force. Defense Force is what's on a small planet that might have a vault or another small group of Necrons on it to begin with. No more than 10,000 or so. And then the Necron Army or Expedition can have up to double or even way more than that. And then Dynasties are very, very large forces, including multiple worlds worth of Necrons going out in one area with a large navy. Branches involve mostly ground, some land with the vehicle constructs, and air forces, of course. Now, a lot of the Necron air forces are orbital, but they do also have some support aircraft. We're not going to be putting too fine of a point on it because a majority of their aircraft are spacecraft first and support craft second. Commonalities and variants. There are different cultures to different dynasties. Obviously, there's color differentials, design differences, preferences in unit type, but they're not really as significant as things like chapter differences. And the makeup of the forces asleep and awake will be different. For example, in this scenario, we're dealing with both a defense force and an army, which means that the defense force is probably going to have a lot less constructs, but having a lot more defensive constructs, things like scarabs, maybe tomb guards, and things of that nature. The spiders, for example, that would be protecting a tomb or a vault, and most of their forces are going to be infantry, but the army expedition, they're going to have a lot of constructs with them as support weapons. How to resist the Necrons. The base level defense is a two-parter, as usual. First one is Harry from Castles, the second one is let's dig graves together. Harry from Castles is a pretty old-fashioned tactic. Because the Necrons aren't necessarily out in the beginning to exterminate all life, of course they want to find whatever tomb resource they're looking for on the planet that got them here in the first place, before they start with the wholesale slaughter of everything with a pulse. Harry from Castles is really the first thing that you have to do. It's this idea of, well, the Necrons have no reason to expend themselves on fighting your surface defenses, so you should get as many people and as many defenders within those defenses, and then start attacking out of them as they continue onward. And the last one, dig graves together. It's a process of once the Necrons have eventually forced their way into the area where they want to be, and they've woken up that defense force, you have to start fighting in the tunnels. You have to start fighting underground, and it's going to be a very different type of situation where you're trying to deny assets to the Necrons that are part of your world's kind of geological structure. A lot of that is going to fall into that cave fighting period, but we'll talk about that more at the end. Dangerous restrictions. So we're aware that there's a Necron tomb here, and we have a little bit of reinforcements. Our PDF has been bulked up quite a bit in order to deal with consistent Necron activity. You know, random defenders, white blood cells essentially, wandering out of the tomb and killing people. We need to have a PDF to deal with that. And in addition, we have a couple of little Mechanicus support groups here and there in order to assist us with exploring this tomb that we've just found. Now that the Necrons have shown up over our planet, they will help us defend it. Assumption: this is not a doomsday scenario. So a lot of the times with Necrons, a whole dynasty or even a large army group going to war it's just doomsday. There's really not much that you can do about it. There are so many thousands of Necrons that are all pretty much going to be heavily resistant to all of your weaponry. They're going to be going after targets that are on your own world. They're going to be damaging a lot of portions of your world by digging or by breaking into the tombs. It's not a doomsday scenario that we're talking about. We're talking about something that is eminently kind of realistic or takeable, but it's not to the level of like book Necrons, where they're just like an endless tide of infinite death machines. So, speaking of infinite tide of death machines, the forces of the Awakened Tomb and the Defense Force. The Defense Force is about 10,000 Necrons on the world. So our group of 20,000 Necron warriors, again, that includes Immortals, Warriors, Flayed Ones, anything will be included within that. If it walks on two legs and looks like a Necron, it's included within that 20,000. On top of that, the attacking force will have 250 constructs. This includes all different types of constructs, from tank size to monoliths to transports, all the way down to things like destroyers and large groups of canoptic scarabs. And then it is equipped with 2 light cruisers, 1 cruiser, and 3 escorts. That's a pretty significant Necron fleet, and it is going to be a massive offensive worry for almost everything that we have on our planet. No matter what our orbital defenses are, unless we're on a super heavily held world, in which case we're on a civilized world, so that's not going to be the case. But a Necron cruiser is a big, big danger, and it will sweep aside whatever actual naval forces we have for the planet, and 3 escorts just to help them out. And then on top of that, there are 10,000 Necrons on world. Essentially, there will be 10,000 Necrons that the Necrons coming from off-world are trying to wake up. And our goal is to prevent them from getting that essentially extra 50% of reinforcements. Why? Well, because teleporting and transporting those Necrons that have been reanimated back to the surface is relatively difficult, and because we're not on the original Tomb world, that means that they won't always be able to reanimate every single Necron, and it's going to be much slower. So that 20,000 is going to be suffering a lot more attrition initially, and then once they get the Tomb on our world working, it will reverse and they will have much lower attrition because they can always reanimate the Necrons. So here's what we have as the forces of Planet X. This is a civilized world. We're not going to talk about orbital weapons for this one because whatever it is, that naval force is significant enough that it's not going to matter all that much. 200,000 local PDF. This is probably going to be good old boys with shotguns and bolt-action rifles mixed in with actual planetary defense forcemen. As we are on a civilized planet, pretty solid chance that they're going to have bolt-action rifles. Maybe a couple of semi-automatic pistols for like sergeants and things like that. But the thing that we have that gives us a lot more punching power is 75, a whole brigade basically, of light vehicles. So these would be something like half-tracks or like light armored vehicles with paired heavy stubbers. So let's say something on the range of like 10 by 90 millimeter heavy stubbers paired up in like a little ringed anti-aircraft mount that we've been using pretty efficiently against Necron warriors for a couple of years. We know that they work. They're light enough that they can move quickly and scout around, and they're heavily enough armed that they can deal with most of the Necron infantry. So that's our elite PDF force, and then our Mechanicus support group is about 2,000 Skitarii. They've been exploring and plumbing the depths of the existing Necron tomb for a while before this attack kicked off, and around 25 vehicles. The 25 vehicles are mostly going to be heavy support servitors. So Cataphrons, maybe a couple of maybe a Castellan robot or two, that type of thing. But there might also be at least one tank in there and probably some transports as well for the Skitarii. But as usual, the Skitarii will probably be running around the battlefield as much. So, foot troops. Here's our baseline foot troops. Necron warriors and immortals. Now you might immediately be saying, aren't immortals not baseline foot troops because they're better armored? Not necessarily. I kind of consider them to be in the same class because one of them is line infantry and one of them is armored infantry. And if we really take a look at it, they're armed very, very similarly. It's just that the Immortals have more armor protection, and they are relatively higher up in the hierarchy, and they have access to mostly heavy weaponry. Weapon analysis. All these boys got Gauss flares and heavy Gauss flares, with the occasional commonality of having heavy weapons, Tesla, and heavy Gauss weapons as a standard. So they will often have a lot of these de-atomizing, medium to short range weapons that do a lot of damage to a lot of targets. And they will be pretty ubiquitous. You won't have squads that all have basic weaponry. Most of them will have at least one heavy option, especially if they're immortals. In a lot of cases, it's going to be a case where they're deployed together. In some cases, they're going to be deployed individually, but the Immortals will probably come from off-world, and the Warriors will mostly come from on-world, or at least they'll have a higher percentage. Their main tactics is the Phalanx line. So, once the actual aggression is done, once the tomb is awakened, the plan for the Necron Warriors and Immortals is line up roughly abreast, and walk in a straight line, shooting every single thing that lives and obliterating it with their Gauss weaponry. That's basically it. That's the whole tactical situation. Now, they might be deployed in particular ways, because we do have an overlord on the field in charge of the attacking force, but the true tactical acumen of the Necron warrior is pretty much limited to walk in a relatively straight line, identify anything that is currently living, turn it into something that is no longer living with your deatomizing blaster, and continue walking. There's not much more to it than that, and they are relatively slow units, so while they can be roughly tactical, or roughly tactically employed, they're not really a tactical assault or a highly mobile unit, which is often why if you want to do any assaulting with them, you're going to have to bring a vehicle or teleport them into the enemy's area. Worst weapon against them is melee, and there's very few units that actually work well with melee in the entire Necron roster. Basically, since they're all made of metal, there's not much that a melee weapon can do to them, and since their chests and torso are pretty well armored, and that's the area that you have to break into, even something like a schnasty bayonet wound or a bludgeoning weapon isn't very effective against them. So I would say no to melee entirely. And the second one is low velocity auto weapons. So our PDF rifles, they are a solid rifle caliber, so we don't have to worry about this. But the pistols you'll have to worry about. SMGs you'll have to worry about. Any stub weapons you'll probably have to worry about. But our nice stub rifles, the long-barreled, 308 firing, deer hunter cartridges, those can pretty reasonably damage things like their arms, heads, necks, torsos, and damage or kill the Necron after a couple of shots. Now, it might bounce or just deal slightly less damage to the torso of the Necron, but I think, especially with the Warriors, there's a chance that you could get a penetration if it was at close range, or if you're shooting a Necron that's taken more damage than usual. So, low velocity is a no, high velocity or rifle caliber at closer ranges is more acceptable, or is a straight up yes if you're doing things like aiming for weak spots near the neck, underneath the arm, or just shoot them in the head. Quite effective. And the next one on the acceptable is las weapons. Las weapons have all the advantages of rifle caliber cartridges, with pretty much none of the disadvantages, and they have more ammunition. In this scenario, unless the Mechanicus brought them along, we don't really have any las guns to pull from, but it would be nice if we did. Best weapons and tactics: heavy stubbers, shotguns, bolters. Shotguns and bolters are really just good because they carry a lot of kinetic energy. They can deform the Necrons. They can crack into their bodies. Essentially, shotgun slugs will be able to break a lot of their internals and mechanisms. And even if you had buckshot or birdshot, probably buckshot, it could go into weak spots like their throats, necks, internals of their torso, and get past their armor protection and deal damage that way. Now, it's mostly going to be the fact that it can stun them and shove them back or even knock them over in terms of impact damage, but still not unreasonable. With bolters, it's going to do that plus kill them. With heavy stubbers, it really has the advantage of both range over them, and the high fire rate allows you to just burst them down pretty easily. And depending upon the caliber, again, in our scenario, something like a 10mm by 90mm is going to be going pretty quickly, but it's not going to have a ton of weight behind it. So it's going to be a thing of you want to spray them down, hose them down pretty well, which is why ours have been paired up specifically because they're pretty good at hosing down Necron warriors and killing them via multiple impacts to weakened areas, like the torso, stomach, or the head. So, light troops and scouts, scarabs, wraiths, flayed ones, and death marks. So, scarabs, they are the repair swarm. They're these little babies here. They've got kind of stabby bits on their fingers, and they have a little mouth that can theoretically do some nasty things as well. Wraiths, they're these boys. They are spooky, they've got long claws, and they're kind of like ghosts. They semi-dematerialize, kind of warp in and out of reality, or bop in and out of reality, and they slide around on their long skeletal little snake leg, and they slash and stab at people. They're spooky, they're good at stealth, they can stay very low to the ground until they need to jump out of the dust and kill you. Next one up is flayed ones. These are psycho killers. Again, we talked about them in the armies video. The theory for them is essentially that they're absolutely batshit insane, and they've modified their necrodermis to have these very long blades. And then the last one, the death marks, they are brain-destroying telesnipers. They can teleport on their own. They have lobotomy guns, which allows them to disrupt your brain's electrical pathing, killing you instantly in the best-case scenario, or lobotomizing you in the worst-case scenario. Small stabbing, big stabbing, and medium stabbing. Literally all three of these just work off of base melee weapons for the most part. Big stabbing is the wraiths. They have almost scythe-like claws that they can use to impale. They're like 2 feet long. They're nasty weapons. Small stabbing is the scarabs. They essentially have these tiny little grabby knife blades and their little mouth, which they can use to grab and bite at you effectively. They're usually deployed in large swarms, so they essentially kill you literally via a million cuts. And then the middle stabbing is the flayed ones. Their blades are long, think something like a kitchen knife, but they are wickedly sharp, even though they're made of necrodermis, and they can kind of move a little bit or twist. They're still very sharp and very bladed, and because they're so long, they can literally stab them into you and then rip them back out again like Wolverine claws. And the last one is the lobotomy gun. The like the disruptor rifle, this nasty thing that the Deathmark has. Like I said, it doesn't necessarily do damage to you so much as it literally breaks down the electrochemical electronic connections in your brain. So I call it the lobotomy gun because it can lobotomize you. If you are in heavy armor and you have some relative protection from this thing, it can still give you brain damage, and if it's a direct shot to the head, you're fucked. It's just going to liquefy your brain and you're dead instantly. So, special variants and tactics. All of these guys are spooky bastards. All of them have ways to sneak up on you. The flayed ones bury themselves in the ground. The wraiths slide along the ground like snakes or bury themselves. The scarabs can fly out of little holes in the wall or out of the ground, or they can tunnel a tiny bit, a little bit just in the dust. And then the death marks can literally teleport. They can just TPR wherever they want. I kind of compare them to like a hacking sniper from TF2. They're pretty close. Worst weapons for them, all of them is melee combat. The Deathmark can teleport, it's never going to give you a fair fight. And the thing is, it doesn't like teleport to a random location, it can teleport just away from you and then shoot you in the head. All the rest of them, melee is a terrible idea. They're all made of metal. The wraiths are relatively tough. The flayed ones are insane, and they want to get into melee with you. They also deploy in squads. So, you're not just going to be bashing one of them to death like you might a warrior. You're going to be fighting multiple of them at the same time, and they are really nasty. And with the scarabs, theoretically, if you had a melee weapon, you could take out one, but can you swing 50 times before one of them manages to rip your throat out? Not really a guarantee. Most acceptable weapon here is massed infantry fire. The death marks are about as armored as the average warrior, except that they have some extra protection for the back of their skull, protecting them from snipers. Flayed ones and wraiths, though, are about as easy to take down as any average warrior. Wraiths can be a little harder because of their silhouette, but they also have a head. Aim for the head, pretty solid way to take out most of the Necrons that have human bodies, relatively humanoid bodies. So with our rifles, we can do the job. Best weapons and tactics, suppressive weapons and light support weapons. So our heavy stubbers are going to do a great job here, especially with the scarabs and with the flayed ones. We can pretty much mow them down. You want to employ some anti-sniper tactics for the death marks. Identify where they're shooting from and then ambush them when they get a shot off. You don't want to let them fire multiple shots because they're probably going to teleport away before they can get there. But catch them on the first shot, swing around a machine gun, hose their position down, or strike them with explosives if you get a chance. Or send out the Scutari after them because they have faster auspex and reaction time than the average human will. And the next one is light autocannons. Probably would be able to blitz down any of these guys, and of course it has the advantage of being able to use flak shells against things like the scarabs and also the death marks. So, bruisers. We've got canoptics constructs like the spider and the scythe. These come in different sizes, but they have various different weapons. Usually they're related to Gauss weapons for the most part. And then Tombs constructs and guardians, again like the scythe. And then Lich Guards and Praetorians. Lich Guards are these boys. They kind of work as bodyguards. So defensive activation is the big thing for the Canoptic constructs, to the Tombs constructs, and the guardians. Effectively, they are like a much stronger white blood cell for the tomb. They are activated or awakened out of storage when the tomb is under attack. They can be used on the offensive, but the tomb has to be 100% ready for that, and our attacking force might only have a couple of these, maybe a dozen or so, when they deploy. The spiders are a little bit more limited than the true, genuine big tomb constructs, and while they act as defensive forces with some of them, there are also ones like the Scythe who have much larger weapon beast constructs that are more designed as mobile heavy weapons. Again, I don't technically call them tanks because they don't really serve that role. They're not really meant to be shot at. They're just kind of meant to have an overwhelming firepower advantage. And the last one, the Lich Guards and the Praetorians, they are bodyguards and jump boys. The Praetorians have the ability to essentially jump really far distances. Some of them can teleport, but I believe the general idea is that they have something similar to a jump pack that they use, while the Lich Guard are literal bodyguards. They have shields, they have swords, and they protect the leader from death. Weapon analysis. We got heavy Gauss weapons and hyperphase blades. Heavy Gauss weapons, again, super deadly, dangerous against basically any vehicles that we have. The light vehicles, it's going to practically atomize half of them. Even the heavy Mechanicus vehicles, it's going to obliterate them with only a couple of shots from the really big ones. And the hyperphase blades, those are the ones that go into the body by phasing out of reality, appear within the body, shove everything around them aside, and then rip back out again. So the hyperphase blades are nasty, really dangerous. You can't really fight them with normal weapons. If you had a bayonet, it wouldn't be very effective against it because they would just slice right through it and then kill you. So the idea is just stay away from these guys. They're quite difficult to deal with. Special tactics. Surprise, everyone is dead now. It's again a similar thing to the last time with the bruisers. Every single time that these guys come onto the field, it's going to be like, welp, that was a moment where we completely lose the advantage of superior firepower, because most of them play into the superior firepower doctrine, but they will also do it in a way where there's a ton of mobility and basically nothing you can do. Like, Lich Guards are really well protected, Praetorians are really well armored, and they're fast, but the Tomb Constructs and the Canoptic Constructs, they just have incredibly powerful weapons, and they deploy in big swarms in the case of the Constructs, or they deploy with a lot of other support forces in the terms of the Tomb Constructs. So they'll have warriors around them protecting them, where you could deal with the warriors. This giant Tomb Construct with a massive Gauss weapon is a lot bigger of an ask. So, worst weapons. Any light or melee weapon. Again, melee, throw it right out, especially for the Constructs, but any light weapon, even our light machine guns, are going to have a tough time dealing with any of these guys. If we don't have any actual heavy options, these guys are really just going to be a throw everything at the wall and hope that it sticks, or identify them to the Mechanicus to see if we can get some support from the Skitarii. Skitarii weapons can do the job, even their basic infantry weapons. Some of them can manage to kill these guys, but we're more going to be relying on their medium to heavy weapons. Things like a transuranic arquebus will put down the tomb constructs pretty easily, and even their electrical weapons or taser goads can deal with the Lich Guardians and the Canoptic constructs better than our bolt-action rifles can. Acceptable weapons. Heavy support weapons and artillery. If we had any artillery weapons, here's the time. Heavy bolters, another good option here. For sure, for the constructs, heavy bolters and medium autocannons will do the job. For Lich Guards, it's going to be a lot harder, especially because they have them darn shields, which are pretty tough. But the Praetorians definitely will work against them. Best weapons and tactics, mechanized and motorized support with medium and AT weapons. Now, if the Mechanicus have these, some Iron Striders or some light armored vehicles with some anti-tank weapons, cool beans. If they don't, we might make it a tradition to keep our light armored forces, our kind of mechanized regiment, with the Skitarii, and have the Skitarii literally sit inside of our vehicles with their heads and weapons poking out, and then we have a double-barreled heavy machine gun, we have a bunch of Skitarii weapons, and we just kind of travel at 30, 40 miles per hour, and we hose down any of these units that we come across, and we drive in circles, because even if the Lich Guardians are tough, they aren't fast, which means that we could pretty easily kite them, essentially, and kill them with overwhelming firepower, or with just eventual damage. So, vehicles. I'm moving through this a little bit quickly because I've got a lot to do. Transports, we got arcs and barges, and monoliths. Monoliths kind of act as a teleportation system, so while they are transports and transit, they also have the ability to move stuff. Arcs and barges, they store the Necrons within them, and then they teleport them out, while providing them with a little bit of infantry support, usually via Gauss weaponry. Medium vehicles and armor. The Necrons rarely have heavy armor. And the best examples of their medium vehicles and armor are destroyers, which you can see down here, kind of floaty boys with giant quad Gauss cannons. Destroyers Plus, which include things like Scorpex. They include reanimators, those kind of tripod-looking things. Locusts, which are a very specific type of destroyer with a 6-barreled Gauss weapon, and hex marks, things of this nature. It looks like it was kind of Necron at one point, but it's been expanded upon dramatically to now have much more firepower like a destroyer. And then, of course, we have the monoliths, which provide more artillery support, but can also have very large weapons like particle weapons. So, the deployment usage, they are annihilation deployments and or heavy transit and transportation. Annihilation deployments are essentially nothing will stand up against any of these in terms of protection. There is no point to having heavy armor when you have a Necron destroyer on the field. Basically nothing short of a Titan or a super heavy vehicle will stand up to it armor-wise. Certainly nothing that we have. So, in our case, the heaviest armor that we're going to have is Mechanicus tanks, which we've already talked about. That's not incredible protection. That's mid as far as heavy vehicles are concerned. So, we can't rely on armor at all. Weapon analysis. The big one here is particle and gravity weapons. We have the Emnitic weapons of the Hexmark. Most of these are using giant Gauss weapons, though, other than the monoliths, which can have those particle weapons. Particle weapons, again, it's anti-proton to proton, anti-ion to anti-ion. It's got antimatter inside of it that expends as a little ball, which creates an apocalyptic nuclear explosion. Not really nuclear, but just a particle explosion. It's huge. The variants of special tactics, the only special tactic here is really overwhelming firepower. Where these guys deploy, they're expected to not really face any real resistance because nothing can stand up to them effectively. They are too damn tough, too damn dangerous, too damn strong in terms of offensive capability to really stand up against. And even kiting them is kind of hard because of how much range a lot of their weapons, especially the destroyer, have. They're some of the ones who really do have a range advantage or even a mobility advantage with the transports over the average light vehicle. Acceptable weapons. Worst weapons is any weapons without any AP. Anything that can't penetrate armor is basically useless. Even against the destroyers that have relative armor, they are much stronger than the average Necron, and they will tank a lot more damage. Acceptable long-range crack and kinetic weapons, we want to stay out of their range radius, especially for the shorter range ones like the Hexmark or the Reanimator. So long-range crack weapons, we're talking about rockets, we're talking about grenade launchers here. We could theoretically be talking about something as simple as like an RPG-7 or as complex as like a transuranic arquebus. But something like an anti-tank gun will also work, and of course tanks will work because they have that advantage of range, and while their armor might not do anything, they might be able to outrange to the point where the enemy's weapons are not able to attack them as easily. Best weapons are heavy artillery and las cannons, and I highlight las cannons here for a reason. It's because the reanimation protocols come in and do their stuff when the vehicle or the construct is damaged enough that it's going to suffer some serious issues. Heavy artillery is a lot of shrapnel, a lot of minor damage. To a degree, Necrodermis can fix a deal of that given time. What it can't fix is a big-ass hole that goes all the way through a destroyer's chest. Las cannons are a great pick here. Leadership and command, we got Overlords and X-Mancers, Chronomancers, Gamma-Mancers, whatever Mancers. They're essentially these specialists. And of course we got Skorpek Lord here. These are long-distance coordination units. They are using spooky Necron tech of all different types. We're talking relic items here, we're talking stuff grafted into their bodies, tachyon arrows, nasty items that is basically pure Necron technology. No standard basic stuff here, and if it is standard basic stuff, it will be a heavy version, like a big old blaster or a heavy Gauss weapon. Their tactics are basically not getting killed. It's pretty rare that you see a Necron overlord that's actually in charge of something on the battlefield. They would prefer to have their Necrons do all of the work. Why should they get in the way of theoretical harm? It's pretty rare that you're going to see them on the battlefield. Worst weapon is just not looking for them, though. If you're not paying attention, if they're free reign and allowed to just teleport around the battlefield, you're kind of wasting the opportunity to maybe endanger your opponent there. So not looking for them is definitely the worst tactic. Most acceptable tactic is hunting them even with their teleportation. Of course, the idea is that a Necron Lord will just teleport away from basically any real danger. But here's the thing, why was he there in the first place? If he had a legitimate reason for being there, causing him to teleport will naturally interfere with that reason. You're doing a good job of just denying him access to freedom of movement. And the best weapon is luring them into a false sense of security. If you start out by not looking for them, if you start out by observing them, maybe identifying a place that they're coming back to repeatedly, if you make them feel like they're safe coming to one or another area, there's a good chance that you can catch them lacking and blow their head off. And again, many different things will work against Necron Overlords. The main thing is that they're so gosh darn slippery that they're hard to actually pin down, but once you get them pinned down, Transuranic Arquebus to the dome, or Plasma Weapon to the chest, doesn't really matter, it'll take care of them. Big issue is just getting them in one place where you can actually kill the bastards. So, famous groups, how to disrupt, logistics, how to resist initially. Again, we talked about Harry from Castles and Dig Graves together. They have a main goal. They want to unite the Tomb forces, get a full 30,000 Necrons, and a secondary goal finished, kill us all. They want to slaughter us all, murder us all, kill us, and make the Tomb world into their Tomb world, possess it without us being there. We need to work to observe them first. Again, Harry from Castles is an aggressive attack. It's everyone come back into the cities, stay out of the way of the tomb entrances. We know that they're going there. We want to observe which one they go to and where they're going so that we, when we go underground to go and deal with them, we know where they started out and we can track where they're going. If they don't set up teleportation, which they might, but it's going to take them a bit. If we do this quickly, which is going to require some serious get up and go time, if we have these areas mapped up, we can plan better ways around them than they have. So, we need to work to observe them first and then counter them when they're bottled up. So when they've organized into one area, when they've set up their base, so to speak, we need to start probing it from different angles, collapsing areas of the tunnels, damaging them, ambushing groups of workers, destroying scarabs, all that kind of stuff. Essentially, hindering them in their ability to reawaken the tomb, and if possible, when they reawaken a portion of it, destroy that portion. So it is this idea of we want to spoil every attack and ruin every opportunity that they think they have to try and reawaken the tomb. Yes, this will affect the overall control and the ability for the tomb to continue operation, but it will also have a negative side effect of waking it up faster. So we're both on a timeline. They want to get more of this place ready to go before we destroy it, and we want to destroy as much of this place as possible before they wake it up. but the tomb itself is waking up slowly. The next part of it is we need to get naval supremacy at any and all costs. The main goal of this is just scream into the warp. You need to get astropaths yelling. You need to get transport ships leaving. Even if they have a naval cordon, essentially, you can send out warnings as much as you possibly need because the Necrons don't really have psychers. They don't have an easy way to deal with it unless there's a ton of Blackstone around, and as long as you can move your astropath to an area where the Necrons currently aren't, you're able to get a scream out for help. And eventually the Imperial Navy will show up. So how to sustain against the enemy? We are on a time limit as we don't know how deep the vault goes, so we have to get rid of them or be doomed to a much larger conflict. Essentially, this has to be dealt with quickly. We need to allow them their initial movement. We don't want to get in their way because essentially they're going to steamroll us no matter where we do on the surface. What we need to do is be able to bottle them up, break their forces around, and the best way to do that is the how to win part. But we'll get to that in a second. If we let them do what they want, if we let them awaken the tomb, we are doomed to a much longer conflict because they will awaken the reanimation protocols within this tomb world, and then they will essentially have an infinite numbers of soldiers to pull from when they fight us in future. So we need to make sure that we kill each force individually rather than trying to fight them together. And how do we do that? Bury or destroy the Necron structures, destroy the reanimation storage, and threaten the viability of the tomb or the vault. Now this comes hand in hand with naval supremacy. Not only can we go underneath the ground and start destroying things, blowing shit up, having the Mechanicus go down and collapse areas, etc., but we can also start actually dozing in and crushing certain areas of the tomb just via good old-fashioned engineering. And of course, where engineering won't do it, we have the Navy. If the Navy shows up and they manage to get rid of the Necron naval forces, and the Necrons on the planet still stick around, which is possible, by the way, they might decide to, good old sunk cost fallacy. They don't think that we can remove them. Orbitally bombard that area where they're having trouble and where they're going into the vault, just start bombarding it from orbit. They don't have any orbital defenses, and if you collapse large portions of the vault with orbital bombardment, it's just as good as us collapsing it ourselves. So that's really the best way to do it, is beyond this kind of quick back-end guerrilla warfare where we follow them down and dig them out, or dig our graves together, so to speak. It's going to be a meat grinder. We're going to lose tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of men in this effort, but every vault that we destroy, every connection we break down, every scarab we kill, every piece of technology that we rip out and burn, essentially, or we give to the Mechanicus, is going to be something that the Necrons don't get to use against us. And then, of course, final option is just orbitally bombard everything that we can't actually take down ourselves. And if we're able to get rid of the Necron Navy options, that's what we got to do. Fallback plan to that is time to escape. This is a tomb world. If it's getting too hairy, get on the naval ships and get your rear out of here. It is not a bad thing when the Necrons are involved to call it quits and go. So, I don't have any memes for you today because it was a busy one and I had that long stream to do, but next thing we have is the continued cycle. We have an archive video and likely some extra goodies to do soon. I appreciate you guys coming in for that video review, for that stream. Remember, we'll be doing more of those in future. Watch out for notifications. I'll be telling people, giving a couple of warnings and posts. No votes up after this because you guys have voted ahead of time. This is the end of the daily uploads for now. I've done a good burst of videos and streams, so don't worry. More will be coming probably by the end of the week. But for right now, I have the next ones lined up, and I will be making them. And I wish you all a lovely good night.